I recently had the chance to take a tour of Digital Domain, a visual effects house founded by people like James Cameron and Stan Winston. And along with Weta in New Zealand, they were responsible for creating Thanos in Avengers Infinity War. The team showed us a ton of their motion capture equipment, including these suits and this helmet camera used to capture the facial performance of actor Josh Brolin. You've probably seen actors with dots drawn on their face during production, and our guides explained how they'd make a mask of the person's face, cut out holes in it, and use that to repaint the marks on them each day to save time. We got a look at what's called a Fax Booth, FACS, which stands for Facial Action Coding System. It's basically a room with lights and about 60 cameras set up for the sole purpose of capturing and logging a performer's facial movements. Later, we were taken into what's called a volume, basically a huge empty room with its own set of cameras all around it. Rooms like these are where movies like Avatar and Ready Player One were filmed. Instead of being shot in a motion capture volume, the production team for Infinity War spread small cameras like these throughout the actual sets and attached motion capture equipment to the film camera, allowing the visual effects team to see what Brolin looked like in the moment with a rudimentary version of Thanos over the top of him. That way the camera operators could frame the shots properly for what was supposed to be an 8-foot character, and then those small cameras were all digitally removed from the final movie. To create Thanos, the team began with this character model. By hand, artists went in and added tons of details to his face, all of the contours and wrinkles you see in the final version. Taking Brolin's facial movements from the fax booth we saw before, the modeling artists will go into every shape Thanos' face could possibly make and correct or enhance those shapes. They'd apply texturing elements, freckles, imperfections, all sorts of aspects to add a level of reality to the character, and they'd really concentrate on making sure his eye movements came through. This is one of the first tests Digital Domain sent to Marvel to prove that they were on the right track.
No, I heard that you were meaning to get in touch with me, but then I heard you were dead. And I also heard that you were a king, and various other things. But the fact is, Loki, you and I are not the sort people understand. The sort people fear. Now I got the information that I need, and now I have to break your neck. It's just the way it is. I'm just a messenger.
For each shot, animation director Phil Kramer would look at Brolin's helmet performance, which you can see on the far right side of the screen, and a high-resolution mask created with machine learning algorithms, which you can see second from the right. He and his team would retarget that performance onto Thanos, copying all of the details onto the model while keeping the essence of Brolin's performance intact. That made it easier to watch and easier for directors Anthony and Joe Russo to make decisions without the distracting apparatus around the character's head. Here you can see what Brolin looked like through monitors on the set, complete with a visible helmet cam and a low-resolution version of Thanos' face. Digital Domain used video game rendering to create a high-end look of the character that's much closer to the final version.
You have my respect, Stark. When I'm done, half of humanity will still be alive.
At the end of the movie, when Thanos has triumphed and he encounters a young Gamora once again, one of the early ideas was to have him walking on a river of blood, intended to represent the blood of his victims. Visual effects supervisor Dan DeLue told us that, quote, got a bit dark, end quote, so they explored other options and ultimately came upon what we see in the final version. I sat down with DeLue and Digital Domain's Kelly Port for a quick interview. Hey guys.
Hey.
How did you decide how much of Josh Brolin you wanted to see in Thanos? What was that process like for you?
It's something that happened early, a couple stages. One, when we first started working on the design and modifying it from what we've seen in some of the previous films. And so it was done mostly in illustration and in this program called ZBrush, where you can actually sculpt the shape. So, we had kind of a wedge or a bracket of too much Brolin, not enough Brolin, and just the right amount of Brolin. And then we had just the right amount of Brolin, just at least from a still frame. We sent it over to Digital Domain and did I have them kind of start figuring out the animation and kind of how much to bring in there.
I think it's basically, imagine morphing from Josh Brolin's face to Thanos, and in that slider, of time, you kind of just find it. It's a subjective thing, and I think, well, that's too much Brolin, no, that's too much Thanos, and
Well,
you just kind of find
and I
it.
think it's something we backed away from too when we were first designing. Because when it was just a still, it's kind of like, oh, that's Josh Brolin, that's not Thanos. But when you start seeing the performance push through it, then you can kind of relax into a little bit more Josh.
That's right. Yeah, because if once he's performing, and then you're seeing a lot more Brolin because that's him performing, so you can maybe dial the Brolin back a little bit, you know.
And performance capture has been around for a long time. Was there anything on Infinity War that was never seen before that you guys worked on that sort of pushed the envelope a little bit?
Well, I think it's the technology in terms of capturing the performance. It's the cameras have improved, the helmet cams have improved, but I think it's what you actually do with that information that you collect that made the difference on this show.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it's 100% unique to this project, but it's nice for the actors to be in a set acting with each other, and not just necessarily in a sort of a sanitized motion capture volume. So instead of that, the sets were peppered with a lot of motion capture cameras in and amongst the set, which was very helpful, I think, to overall improvement of the actors' performance, so that they're already having a hard enough time, in the silly motion capture suits and or lots of blue screen around them, but to make it as helpful to them as possible to be in and amongst the set and working with each other, I think was a big benefit too.
How much of this movie was pre-vised before the script was written? Like, were there any big set pieces that were locked in ahead of time?
Yeah, a lot of the big sequences will viz. It's like, so Thanos' battle on Titan, that was viz. A large portion of Wakanda was vizzed. A lot of New York, the Battle of New York was viz. Spidey's all the race to space, Spidey going into space, that was vizzed. And we have a unique kind of a way of doing it where it's, a lot of it will be pre-viz, where you have artists on computers. We'll have, when our stunt team starts, they'll start doing their own viz. So you have pre-viz and stunt viz there, and then you'll have storyboards as well. So when you watch the reel cut together, you can see the movie, but it's this kind of crazy jumping back and forth between, pre-viz that's rendered and stuntmen with cardboard boxes they're bumping into, and then straight back into storyboards.
Was there a single shot that changed the most for you guys over the course of involving Thanos, or anything else really that over the course of this movie that changed dramatically from its original conception to the final version?
Yeah, I mean, Titan stayed pretty true. I mean, what we work with on Titan, we generally we go long. We go for a wide, longer cut, and then so we can kind of pick out the best gags as we go along with it. So there's alternate versions of all the scenes. There's an alternate version of the Wizard's battle with Strange and Thanos, and then the smaller version that ends up in the film. I think something like the Threshers in Wakanda, they went through a lot of design because it was just. It was one of those things that wasn't quite working until ILM got in there and just, had the big Thresher come up behind Panther, and it was like, that's going to work now. It's going to be fine.
Yeah, and I think for us, from a studio perspective, oftentimes with Dan and the directors and the post-viz team, third floor, we get a lot of the stuff that's cut together. So it's a roadmap that's pretty solid. Sometimes we would get, for example, the way station, we'd have sort of this is after he snaps his fingers, what that world with little Gamora, how that should be represented. So we went through sort of an exploratory phase with that one, so looking at different options and what does that mean, and talking a lot about that. So that went through some changes, at least for our part.
For the past few years, I've been hearing a lot of horror stories about visual effects houses taking on increased workloads for maybe smaller commissions from big studios and stuff. Do you guys think that there are any solutions to that problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's you're in a place where visual effects allows us to tell bigger stories than we've been able to tell before, and so as a result, we're getting more and more shots, and trying to figure out the best way to deal with that. So it's we're at a point where I think there's some things that need to be worked on, but I don't know if we've really solved it yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's a competitive industry. It's a business, both ends, both for what we do, like as a visual effects studio and other visual effects studios, but it's also obviously a business for Disney, for Marvel. So everyone's trying their best to do their best at that business. And it's also incumbent on ourselves to make ourselves as competitive as possible too, by being more efficient and faster. So it's sort of the way it is. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And finally, we also got to see the actual Infinity Gauntlet that was used during the making of the movie. In addition to helping Josh Brolin feel the actual weight of the gauntlet and add that reality into his performance, it served as a practical reference point for their visual effects team, so they'd know how it reacted to certain lighting when they needed to recreate the final digital version. And since I got to wear it, there's really only one way to end this video.
Ready? Let's go.
Let's put on our mean faces.
Hold on, there's a fly.
There is something awesome about seeing these heroes interacting with each other for the first time.
I'm Dr. I Can't Walk.
Plastic. You guys are screwed now!
It's gonna look awesome.
Cool?
So cool.
All right, kid, you're an Avenger now.
Yes!
Marvel Studios Avengers Infinity War on digital today.